that matter of fact. Let's move on. So dealing with speaker arrangement, what are we going to be talking about today? A few subjects, quite a bit of subjects. We'll talk about these predefined arrangement, these arrangements that we have updated and cleaned up. So in SPAT, yes, speaker arrangements are predefined for you. They're standard arrangements, right? The stereo system all the way to multi-channel system, uniform domes. We'll look at them a bit later. And then we'll talk about how to create or modify a user speaker arrangement, meaning a speaker arrangement you've created that it's editable. We'll talk about this and actually how to add speakers, remove speakers, manage this speaker list in an arrangement. We can't forget about subwoofers. We'll be bringing the subject of LFE, low frequency extension. So any .1 speaker, in an actual arrangement. So we'll be covering that subject as well, as it is part of creating a speaker arrangement. And then we'll get in some interesting stuff. Well, all of it is interesting, but we'll be talking about exporting arrangements. So how to export these users' speaker arrangement that you just created. And then the fun begins of importing. Yes, importing from the FLUX export, but importing as well from an Excel sheet, from an Adamson simulation software, from D&B Audio Technique, from Ease Raw Data, from simulation software, from Nexo. Some other of those simulation software now, are giving us the ability to export from them and actually import. So we'll be looking at this. It will be quite interesting. And then as we talk about import from, the options to adapt this importing data, to adapt them maybe to lower. We'll talk about lowering and an arrangement, for example. And thence will bring us to transformation. Transformation is what? Well, it's exactly what it is, it says. It's transforming an arrangement, moving an arrangement, rotating an arrangement, Maybe, you imported something and it's actually not at the same reference point that you want it to be. Well, we'll move it up, move it left, move it right, or rotate it. So this would be the transforming aspect of the conversation. We'll then move on into when we have those arrangements, we may want to be using a function that's called computing. And computing arrangements are typically used when you are, in a listener-oriented panning and you're surrounding speakers, around the listener. So we'll talk about the compute. Maybe the speakers aren't located physically where they should be to be, equidistant. So we'll talk about this computing. And then we'll kind of wrap up into two other things. Now that we have a speaker arrangement, we may want to be adding a background, an actual image, an overlay, a nice top view from either the simulation software or whatever, for that matter of fact, maybe from our SketchUp or, from a top view of the scene. And then last but not least, this is where it's going to start to get intense. And we'll talk about understanding speaker arrangement as they relate to panning methods. And what I mean by this is simply the fact that not because we have, and you'll realize this if you're new to this channel, not because we can create all the arrangements in the world and we give you complete flexibility on up to 64 speakers in arrangement, not because we give you that flexibility that they necessarily will work and will be compliant, if you want to accept this word, compliant to all the panning methods. So we'll kind of talk about this, make you realize a few things as you start to create an arrangement. Are the physical position really what I need in my spatial engine? Is it really what I need for the panning aspect? And that's what we'll talk about. Yes. I can take a deep breath. I know I get intense. People have told me this in the past. I get excited. I get excited with the subject. And I'm very happy to deliver this to you today. Again, if you've got some question, you feel free. We'll get started and we'll start to talk about the first aspect, which are those predefined arrangements. And those predefined arrangements are basically 66 standard arrangements that we've got now. Maybe the number went up or down yesterday, but we're pretty much locked at 66 predefined arrangements. And they cannot be edited in the sense that they are predefined. They come with the SPAT, and really the only way to actually move with them, if you want to use them and modify them, is to duplicate them to do an edit. And we'll look at this in 2 seconds. We'll then talk about speaker arrangements that are not just an actual speaker setup. For that matter of fact, they are multi-channel source arrangements as well. They can be used as an input. I have a 5.1 source. Well, you're gonna basically say that multi-channel is a 5.1. It is an arrangement, right? It's a speaker arrangement. It's a source arrangement. It's an object arrangement, right? And we'll be briefly talking about the fact that unique naming is very important. And the reason is simple. We're actually using that naming for summation. We sum on naming. So when you're bringing multiple things together. Voila. Well, actually, I think that we could actually move right in SPAT. Well, let's actually get to start about this, and then I'll move to SPAT in 2 seconds. So what we're going to be digging into, with this edit, right, as we either we're creating a new arrangement or we're actually modifying an existing one, is we'll be talking about how to add lines and add the number of speaker to the arrangement. Let me actually dig right into it, and we'll come back to this as kind of a review of what we've just learned. So let's do this. Voila. Okay, you guys should be seeing my screen, and for that matter of fact, I'm actually wondering if you want to see my face as well. Maybe not. Actually, let's leave it at this for now. You don't need to see my face all the time, do you? I don't think so. So here we are. We are actually in a SPAT environment right now. There's some stuff going on the screens, and let's not focus on that one. I'm actually going to be adding a room right now to talk about our famous speaker edit. And as you saw, I just added a room, and by default, it actually made it a stereo arrangement. And this is kind of our default configuration. If I actually pull down this menu, here is that long list I was telling you about. These are all the predefined. The ones at the end of my list are actually user specific, but all the beginning of the list, and it's in order of 2D arrangements and 2D arrangements, and you see them all, from a mono, stereo 1121 all the way to NHK 22.2. Salutations again to our friend in Asia, and then we actually get into those uniform arrangements, half uniform, full uniform. Our friends at the IRCAM Research Center, the 24.0 dome, and then we've got these Sloans, which I'm not going to talk about today, but that have been added as well to the list. So these are our arrangements. Now, if actually, I have an arrangement there, you can see right next to it that there's an edit button, and this is where it's going to get interesting. If I press this edit, here I am in a speaker configuration view. I'm in a speaker configuration view, and I can see my left, right, 2 speakers, so 2 channels, right? Number of channels right there. And then I can see, that we've got a left and right speaker. And as you can see as well, is that I can't delete, I can't rename, I can't add, I can't really do anything. There's a bunch of things that are grayed out. And that is because, as I said, predefined arrangements can't be edited. Now, if I wanted to edit this one, and we could actually go to something maybe bigger, let's just take an Atmos arrangement here, for that matter of fact. So if we actually, take this Atmos here, same goes on. If you had maybe a slightly modified arrangement, maybe, physical locations are different, you could basically, as simply as doing a duplicate, create or recreate a new arrangement. At this point, you're basically creating a user arrangement, something that you can delete, rename, export, and so on and so forth. By default, it puts the word copy next to it. We could obviously rename it. We're just going to apply this, and that's it. Now you see all the lines have appeared here. I can delete it, what I just created. I can rename it as well, as simply as renaming the name that we saw just before. And you'll be able now to actually add speakers. If you add extra speakers, we'll deal with this in 2 seconds when we create a new arrangement. But then we have the ability to actually change position. I actually go down the list of speakers. I could decide, physically this one is not in that location. It's actually off. Maybe it's a bit further away, has to do with the actual room, for example. We'll talk about speaker arrangements a bit later, but I want you to kind of appreciate the fact that now we have a completely, an arrangement that's completely edit ready, okay, so that we can completely edit. Making sense? But let's, for that matter of fact, start from a scratch one. There's nothing better than starting from scratch, and we're going to do one right here for us, and we'll call it webinar. Hey, what about that? And then there it is, blank slate. Blank slate for you. All the options are available, and we're actually going to be basically dealing with adding speakers 2 ways. We'll talk about imports later, but at this point here, we're going to go from a manual import perspective. So we're either going to be adding a bunch of speakers. You can see speakers add, but the first one is adding a single line. So there we are. We're adding basically, speakers on the line. We've talked about unique naming. We're doing this for you. You don't have to think about it. And there we are actually that we can start to position those speakers. We're working on X, Y, Z coordinate or on azimuth elevation distance. Pick your battle, one or the other. For people that are new to this channel here, will realize that we are not, basically pushing a polar approach or a Cartesian approach. We actually handle both. So, we could basically say, this one is actually, at 1 meter on the X and at the 2 meter here. So in front of me at 2 meter distance, and X, so left, right, -1 to the left, +1 to the right, so to my right. And you can see right now the azimuth is at 26 degree. If I rather say, hey, no, make it a 30-degree speaker, well, there's your calculation on the X, Y that's happening. Making sense? I hope it does. Now, if we have to do a mirror, right, we could do it here, right there, with a -30 degree. Don't forget that we have to put the distance as well. Let me just copy and paste. You can actually do copy and paste feature if you want. And there you are with our second speaker. And this is it. I can obviously go on and on and on about this, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory the way that we deal with, adding speakers to the equation. As you select a speaker, it gets highlighted now. You've not seen this one highlighted because there's a stack of them on top of each other. Well, there you are. There's a speaker here. Voila. Voila. Okay, hope this makes sense. Now, as we're talking about this list now that we're creating, we can as well move it up. Maybe that speaker, we want it to be speaker number 1 in the physical slot. You see the numbering right there. So actually, you can actually move this speaker up. You see it, 6 is going all the way up. So that would just be a way to reorder, your order. And that's ultimately the output, right? So speaker 6 will be the first one. So if you have to reorder something, maybe there's an arrangement, that we've predefined that is actually not the order that it should be or that you want it to be. Well, you could duplicate it and reorder speakers this way. Making sense? Making sense? So these are basically these users creating snapshots. And if I am done with this, well, what do I need to do? I need to simply, maybe I talk about delete. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. If I want to kill this one, I can kill it there. So add plus, delete, move up, move down are pretty much our 4 friends right there as we're doing this. Now, if I apply that, actually you see it right there. The webinar arrangement is in that actual room right now, okay? This is what we freshly created. Now, let me get back to the actual edit functionality, and we're actually going to do something cleaner. Yeah, let's just go delete this, delete this, delete this, delete this, delete that. Blank slate again. So still on the webinar arrangement, I'm still, it's not protected, it's live, from that perspective. So I can obviously, add speakers and delete speakers. But what I want to talk to you about is this other button is actually quite interesting. And it brings some sort of a transform function, but really what it is, it's the ability to say, hey, Hugo, I want 7 speakers on my arrangement. And I have 3 options of transformation of what I'm about to do here. And it's either I want to do a linear uniform distribution along an axis, and we'll look at this in 2 seconds. Either I'm going to do something as a circle, so something around the listener. And last but not least, and I guess why not, a sinus. Yeah, don't ask me why a sinus. There's maybe reasons for it, but that was a desire of our lead developer, Gal. I say hello to you here. Just so you so the sinus is the third option into the equation. But let's get back to the first one, linear uniform distribution along. So what we're basically doing is we've got, the axis choice. So we can do this on the X or on the Y axis. And on the X axis is what? Well, is in front of us, right? It's the left to right. So we're going to basically be going to say, hey, what's the spacing between in meters? We can say we want 2 meters spacing between the speakers at a distance of 2 meters. So where's the line? At 2 meters in front of me. And then we're not going to avoid using height for the moment. And I could just go apply. And if I scroll out here, you see that it did the arrangement for me, right? Isn't that simple? Yes, we love that one. That's a truly new. I'm actually mixing some things that were already in there as we're talking about speaker arrangements. I'm on purpose kind of reviewing the things that we've been doing before. Not all is new, but the add plus like that is new. And I want to circle something around the user, circle. I want a distance of 2 meters, maybe some elevation. I can even decide where I start the first speaker. If I put it at 10 degrees, and I'm going near the phase is either I go to the left or to the right. By default, it goes clockwise, apply, and there we are. We started the first speaker at 10 degrees, and then we've got 8 speakers equidistant. And as we did phase positive, so we're going towards clockwise first speaker, right? Making sense? I like to think it's making sense. Voila. Voila. I think we've covered this actual portion pretty good. Let me actually just get back to that transition here, and we'll kind of review what we just discussed. So basically, you know what I just showed you here is the add plus, so adding a line, or the add, add line, or add to add a number of speakers. So speakers add, you add multiple ones, or the plus add is for a single line. And when we're actually doing the add with a number of speakers, like we just did, right? So we get the option of, linear uniform distribution. We're choosing the axis. We've got the circle, uniform circle around the listener. And then last but not least, we did not look at sinus, but it was there as you saw. Now, as I was saying, duplicated speaker names will get renamed as the names need to be unique. And that's very important. As I said before, we use this naming for summation. Summing what, Hugo? Well, 2 rooms, same speaker arrangement, you bring them into a single master. We want to sum those 2 streams. But for that matter of fact, you could be summing 2 rooms that have different speaker arrangements or slightly different one. Maybe one is a complete system or a partial system, and you want to sum them back together. Well, if you actually use proper naming strategies, there you are ensuring that the summing happens properly. Making sense? I hope. And then the last but not least, all these user-created arrangements, or important arrangements from maybe, and we'll look at importing today, are actually saved in a new folder now. And it's actually, we actually changed some of our resource folders for SPAT. But it's basically, there's a folder, called SPAT Revolution in your document, or FLUX Software Engineering SPAT Revolution, and in this is a config folder. There's a file called IO config, and you can back this one up. That's the reason I want to talk about it. If you were to trash your preference, which is something that we maybe do, on some occasions, or you just want to back up all your stuff, just the speaker arrangements to make sure you can take them back, that is an actual practical file for that. Making sense? Okay, moving along, we've actually looked at the delete and the move up and down to change the speaker orders. It was simple. Arrangements created can be renamed and deleted. We actually saw that, right? I was able to delete it. Did I do this? I think I did it. Well, you saw the delete button that became available. Again, only to user arrangements, not to the predefined ones. And then the last but not least, I actually did not, and I'm going to go back to SPAT on this one, is the ability to, well, you saw me do it, but I'm actually going to look at it, to actually move the actual, and you can see it there, I can actually spin this. So if I press on the control key and I move, I can actually rotate the arrangement, number 1. Number 2, if I click the option and I click, it's basically a view reset, okay? And last but not least is the shift. So if I hold shift, I can move the actual arrangement, okay? Right there for me. And the last one is, scroll in, scroll out, right? Scroll in, scroll out, zoom in, zoom out. So these are the 4 functions, the 4 option functions in a speaker view to actually preview what's going on, what you're doing. Okay? Making sense? Let's move back to where we were. Kept moving. Then managing the LFE speakers, the famous .1. So the story is quite simple. Any speakers in an arrangement that are either called sub or LFE, we basically picked up on this name, and this is a speaker that gets fed not from the, it basically is not a spatial loudspeaker anymore. It's a speaker fed from an LFE SEN. And all of our sources in SPAT have an LFE SEN. It's a NOC SEN, right? So the ability to send signal to this actual channel, this actual speaker. And let me just actually show you this quite rapidly. What would happen in this particular case, we've got 8 speakers, and if I need to add a line here, I can call this one LFE, and we're done. So that speaker, I don't need to care about where it's located physically. And if I apply this, what you'll see here is we have an arrangement, and we can actually appreciate that if I bring a source into it. You will see that right now, oops, sorry for that, I'm clicking too fast. You can see here that I can send signal. And if you're actually looking at my bottom here left, all right, you'll see that there's a signal going on that channel. So it's not the spatial loudspeaker, it's the LFE SEN, just as simply as adding in our arrangement this LFE. And actually, for that matter of fact, I can do LFE1, LFE2, LFE3. Now, it's a single, aux-AND, but it's going to feed the three of them. Not sure you want to do this, or yes or not, but whatever, it's there for you. Same applies for the word sub. Simple, right? I think this is fairly simple. So that's our story on actually talking about LFE channel. Now, example of how to export a speaker arrangement or speaker arrangements. So we've just created an arrangement here, right? As you saw, we created the one webinar, but we may want to be exporting it. And why would you export it? Well, you don't necessarily need to bother for one thing. If it is present in your session, your SPAT session, it will come with it. We import speaker arrangement on load of a session. You don't necessarily have to bother, but if you want to make sure that you make a copy, or maybe you're doing something for someone else, or you want to export and send just the speaker arrangement, this is how you would be doing it. So let's just switch to this, and we'll simply go to the export. And what you basically see is all the arrangements that are custom. So we've got this Russia thing. I've got a bunch of collinear and coplanar, which we'll use later in the conversation. You saw my 714 Dolby Atmos copy that I made, and the one called webinar. So I can actually checkbox, say export, and there we are exporting this actual arrangement into an IO config file. So we'll look at import later, but that's pretty much what it is. Simple, simple. All user arrangements are being exported. Well, can be exported. You can select all or just do a single one. Okay. Now, we've exported something, we actually want to import stuff, but now we're looking at a new feature, and it's not just importing from an actual from an actual FLUX export, but actually from these third-party simulation software. And here they are. So the new import from FLUX, so the new feature is basically you can import from the FLUX IO config file, the export that I just showed you, or we're now opening doors to third party, which include an Excel import. And we'll look at this one right away. So FLUX IO config, so this is our standard kind of, traditional import and export of arrangement. We have brought 5 new ones on the list. Excel. So yes, simple template, XYZ speaker name. I'll show it to you in 2 seconds. Take this, import it. You have raw data, positions from object. Just do it on the Excel. Simple. And then if you rather export from a simulation software because you're preparing a show, and you're using a loudspeaker manufacturer specific tool, here we are. Adamson Blueprint simulation software, which we'll actually use as an example later. D&B as well. AriCalc allows you to export. They export as ease data, they call it, but it's a D&B ease export format. So we're actually going to be looking at this ease. So ease, real ease, raw data to import straight in SPAT, and last but not least, Nexo. So Nexo NS1 simulation software. And you were going to be looking at the same time as how we can modify. So there's options to import this. But the best way, and I'll come back to this, is to jump back into SPAT to be able to appreciate this. So now, let's say we wanted to import something, and let me pick up the simplest one and the easiest one, the Excel sheet. Here I have a speaker config file. I'll show it to you in 2 seconds. That I can basically simply import this to the space. And these are the import options that I was just telling you about briefly on my slides, which I'll come back to. And you get basically 2 options when you're importing. Number 1, and it's actually by default engaged, is called lower arrangement. And I'll cover this later on when we're talking about speaker arrangements and rules and stuff. But basically, you may have a speaker arrangement with a bunch of elevations and nothing is at the 0. Actually, there's a little box that my friend made here, Nicola, not long ago, which says this reason is basically both practical and needed for 3D vector-based spanning. And practical in the sense that imagine that your first speaker is at 2 meters, but then by default, sources are at 0 meters. That means that every single time you put a source, or the default position of the source is not on the same layer. Non-practical. So yes, so we have this option here to lower arrangement, and you have a clear message that says the main left speaker on my import and all other speakers at the same elevation will be set to Z0 elevation 0. Simple. Now we're not flattening out everything. We're just taking the lower layer, maybe multiple layer 3D arrangement, boom, The first one is at 0, very practical. Second option, lower all speakers to 0, simple. And this is what? This is to make a 2D panning or a 2D setup. And we'll talk about why you should not always make 3D panning and why some arrangements, even the speakers may be a bit higher, doesn't necessarily make sense to make a 2D arrangement. So basically this will, if I do this, and I'm actually going to do that, it will basically ignore any elevation, and we can do this import, and here we are. Scrolling out, this is the arrangement. As you can see, I can actually move it there. And it would be a typical left and right system with some side speakers on the wall, like a cinema style room or something like that. It's making sense. So what I want you to appreciate here is this is coming from a simple document. And let me show it to you right there. And this is it. Excel sheet, speaker names. The top name here right there, SPAT FLUX import, is actually the speaker arrangement name. XYZ in meters. Yes, we work in meters. Anyone using Imperial system, I salute you. But yes, we're fully metric, main, left, right, and all those speakers. So this is the data. But these Zs here have been ignored. If I actually go back, and these files will be available as a template, by the way. But if I go back to SPAT, you can see that all my elevations is now at 0. Thank you. Thank you for these options on the import that my friend Nicolas did for us just yesterday, actually, as we were wrapping up some of the latest details. So what's the conclusion on this? We import speaker configuration. There's some options to lower. Practical, obviously, you don't want to have your first layer higher than the default source. You're 0, right? Your 0 makes sense, to be your first layer. And we have, obviously, as we said, the lower all speakers to 0. Okay. Now, the import from demonstration, well, I actually jumped into the Excel portion of it, but I can actually quickly, and we'll come back later on it, go to the actual other options. If I actually take an Adamson, import right now, you can probably see this right there. Et voila, same story goes, Adamson import number 1. Here I'm just going to lower the arrangement, and I'm not going to lower everything. I'm just going to bring it down because I actually have elevation on this one. Although the speaker arrangement most probably would be better in 2D. Actually, I'm just going to lower to show you the concept of this. And there we are, okay? So we've basically have all these speakers now that have been imported from an export from the Blueprint software, and I have them. Now, we have a problem. What's the problem, Hugo? As you can see, my listener is not surrounded by what we could call a convex all, and we'll talk about these things later. So that just means basically the reference point is the speaker, is the stage in their case, I think. So basically the reference point is not the proper one. Hugo, what do? Do I have to re-enter all this stuff manually? Well, this is what you had to do before, not anymore. And thanks to transformation, we'll talk about this in 2 seconds. Now, this speaker arrangement, is it pretty much similar to what I did on the Excel, right? We've got the left, right, center, or left, center, right, and we've got speakers all around, theater, shoebox, whatever, speakers all around. So voila. What did I want to say? Yeah, well, I think we can pretty much right away talk about this new transform feature, right? So where we basically got the little challenge here that our arrangement is actually the reference point of their export is not the same as what we want it to be. Rest assured, thanks to transformation. Transformation allows you to transform the speakers or the arrangement in a long list of things, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's a long list of ways that you can transform this in our particular setup here, and we can scale distance, rotate on the azimuth, the arrangement. But for this particular example, I just want to be offsetting something, and I want to offset what? I want to offset the Y. Right? The Y line, mean front to back. So what I'm going to do, and I know precisely there was 14.4, I think. So minus, no, not minus, we're going plus 14.4, apply, and no, that was not it, it's minus. So you go, so that's what happens. Let me just So what do I do to correct it? I double it up, all right? So I want to be going now 28.8 in the other way. Voila. So you see my center now of reference is kind of the center of the room. So that was it. So the transformation, transform and arrangement, you can rotate it. The list is long, but that's just to kind of show you those new features. Making sense? Now, and actually, we'll go back to the speaker arrangement to talk about the next one, which is computing and reset. Nothing new is there, but basically, this is our function to align all speakers to be equidistant to that center of reference, that virtual listener, if you want to call it. And these are mainly important for sweet spot centric approach or angular panning, right? When we're based around speaker location and a sweet spot and the angles, which is traditional to, a lot of pannings, including in the, some of the mixing tools out there, the creative tools for mixing immersive audio, typically we're talking about angular method, sweet spot centric. Now we have others than that, but when you're dealing with those, being able to actually compute the arrangement and why we'll talk about in 2 seconds is actually quite interesting. Now what we're going to be doing with this compute is delay and gain to the furthest away speaker. We'll basically want to make every single speaker's equidistant, although physically, and what we just imported is a great example, physically the speaker on the wall, right? But they're not equidistant to that center. We'll fix this with the compute. This is available inside the room control as well as a mute. So we'll see this, and then you'll be able to visualize the physical and the virtual speakers. Better to do it live like this. Okay, you see the compute is right there, and if I press compute, look at what just happened for us. All speakers that are surrounding that reference have been aligned, and you can see the delay and the gain that was applied was basically aligned to give us an equidistance, which will basically smooth out the panning as as you're moving things around. As simple as this, and you can appreciate the physical location in the gray, and the active one is taking, well, the virtual one, the delayed speakers is actually taking our color of active speakers in the arrangement. As simple as this. Now you can reset this, and we can apply this, and let's go out. I said it was available in the room as well. So when you are in a room, and we are in a room view right now, not in the speaker edit, in the room view, we actually, when we go on the output section on the left, we actually have this reset and compute right there for you. Boom. It just computed our speaker arrangement, furthest away speakers, the reference, everything gets delayed to it. Reset, boom. And while we're here, let's appreciate the fact that we can now mute speakers. You can see signal go away. That's a sine wave that's coming in. You can mute speakers on the fly if you want to eliminate this, if you're troubleshooting a system, so on and so forth. Back to me and to this. So this was the story on the computing and the reset. Not obliged to compute, obviously. It really depends what you're trying to do. Now, background overlay. Yes, so we've imported a speaker arrangement, but we may want to be seeing some stuff, right? So what we have for an option, and this is happening in the room view that we're actually going to go back to, we can basically add a overlay of a top view of a stage, from export from a simulation software. And what we can do with this image is we can scale it up and X, Y, offset and rotate it to make sure it sits nicely on a speaker arrangement. Currently, to know, by the way, it's a square image only. So typically, ideally, your reference of that image is the center of the audience, the same one that you'll typically be doing in the SPAT if you've been following me. But yeah, just to know it's a square image. If you're fine. If you're bringing a square image, you can obviously then use the X, the Y, and the scale or the rotation to move it, to bring it. And always better to do this live in a demo. So I'm going to apply this. What do I have here? Okay, let me just import again. Let's do this. Import from Adamson. And we've got this particular one. And you see, it's going to call it number 2 now. Unique naming as well. We're going to lower everything to 0. And I'm going to import this. Now I have this arrangement. Remember, I had to transform it on the XY. And I had done a boo-boo. 14.4, I think, is my value, and I did it again. You see? Did I did it again? Because I went too fast. Let me just import it again to make sure. Voila. Import number 3. Lower everything. Boom. I guess I did not push on the right transform. I probably did the scale. So offset. Voila. Hugo, you can do this. Good job. I had them send import number 3s in my room. We're going to go in this room and let's go appreciate now this actual background image that you see right there. You saw me play with reset and compute, but here I can actually bring an image. And if I'm correct, this is the one, and I'm going to ask it to show it. Now, Hugo, it's not scaled. Well, it's not scaled. I don't remember what it is, but I think it was that. Maybe there's a little offset that's needed. Yeah, it's going to be good enough for rock and roll. So there we are. We have an actual overview of the system. We can remove the speaker alpha if you're just scared to see your actual room. And then we have a source in the space that we can move. Now, the source is a bit small, and we're going to scale it up. Voila. So here's our source in the space. This is only a 2D, right? If I spin the room again, you can see that this is flat. Reset, option, click, voila, scrolling out. And then here you are with the background image. Very practical. I'll show you another one maybe later. Yeah, you'll be seeing a bunch of ones later, okay? So this is our background image. Very, very nice to actually, preview a room. Voila. Okay, now we're getting in the tougher stuff. And we're going to start to talk about, I say tough, it's not tough. It's just the conversation is going beyond speaker arrangement and understanding how it relates to panning method. So let's review some of those rules, which I've talked already about. And, some of them are kind of best practice, and relates to the panning. Not any speaker arrangement can work with any panning. And you'll now see error message as you try to do a panning method that doesn't have a compliant speaker arrangement. The first question we've covered is why lowering the first layer, the Z, to 0. And as I said, this is practical, and we'll talk about why it's more than a practical thing. It has to do with triangles. What? What you go? Yeah, we'll talk about this. It has to do with convex all around a listener. So the sweet spot centric will definitely want to have, some anyway, I'm going to get back to this in 2 seconds. Now, the one that I really tough to talk about all the time, and the Adamson we just did is a perfect example, is your setup really 3D? And the answer is simple. If you have, a front, left, center, right, or a left-right system that is, let's say, I don't know, on at 4 meter high, and then you've got the audience sitting in the rake, right? Those rake on a theater, and there's speakers following the rake. Although you may say, Hugo, I want to import this and bring the elevation in, from a panning perspective, it does not make sense to make this a 3D arrangement. There's no real elevation here. The source in the front is, the image is not really going to go up. And the sides, plus you don't want to be moving a source and have it to follow the rake for it to make sense. And for that matter of fact, the audience always have the speaker at the same height, right? The rake of the speakers or the line of the speakers is the same as the rake of the audience. From that perspective, if it's a traditional theater, I would right away put everything at 0. Everything is on the same plane. You can move from the front, left to right, to actually move on the side without having to elevate or lower anything, right? If you were to keep a relationship between the main PA and the other one, you would have to kind of play the game there. And that would just be really weird and not practical. And obviously, maybe even worse than this, you're trying to do 3D, and 3D means triangulation. We'll talk about triangles, and why this is not the good strategy for it. Making sense? And then everything that has to do with extended speakers. In the Adamson, I already deleted the front fields and the subs and any other speakers, delay line, for example, that would be extended speakers, or we could say derived speakers. So a speaker that gets a signal from multiple speakers or multiple outputs that are getting the same feed, right? These are an extension of. And these are typically routed either with a separate room. I may have a front field room or a balcony room if I really wanted to spatial something differently. But most of the time, you'll be dealing with an external routing, right? If you're doing a live show, that same source will be distributed into a matrix, into loudspeaker management. Currently, there's no way to do this in SPAT. You're taking the output, yeah, and that's it. You can deal with it. You can deal with it with subs, as we saw before, right? If you want the same output, but that's pretty much it. So if you are, trying to take a signal and bring it to other places, you're going to be doing this externally. Don't need to import those front field speakers. They don't need to be there in the panning. They don't make sense, and we'll kind of go over that. While we're talking about these speakers and talking with speakers means as well choosing proper speakers, and this can be a wide conversation. It can go on depending on rooms and audience location and so on and so forth. But two little kind of things that can be interesting to keep in mind is we've been traditionally looking at lately 80-degree angs and 90-degree angs, but you would definitely probably favor something wider. And wider obviously means more audience will get the coverage, right? So this is something that you kind of want to keep in mind as you're building these systems around listeners, for example. So wider speakers for wider audience. And the other thing we find, and thanks to my friend Terence that actually reported on some things that they've done lately, is that if you left the speaker physically at the height of the ears, you won't benefit from elevating it. And actually, as you elevate it, you obviously get a wider coverage. So elevating speakers to, let's say, 2.5 to 3 meter, maximum, from the floor, where you've got some people in the audience, so a bit above the head and shooting down is actually a good strategy as well to kind of, you kind of get out of it. You're not as much in the face of the audience if you want and limiting your coverage. You're kind of just a bit further away. Are kind of two quick little strategies that I wanted to put, on the table. Now, let's get in the intense stuff. We're getting close to the hour. It's going to get a bit more intense, and then we'll get some questioning going. Or me talking here about panning and appropriate arrangement. So the first one to talk about and is what we call, in 2D anyway, and this distance-based panning, which is basically, what I could call equal power panning, right? I can show you this in 2 seconds. Is one of our 2D options together, that work quite well for non-sweet spot centric system, irregular systems, museum installation, very wide distribution of audience. You're not trying to surround, so you're going to be using a traditional 2D panning that's called distance based, that's based around the distance of the source of the speakers, no relationship to the listener. That's important. And then what you'll be happening here is you'll have an equal power distribution. And we'll show you this in 2 seconds. Actually, because we're on it, let me just switch this to right here to it or not. Just 1 second, just making sure my things are going good here. Interesting. Okay, yeah, there we have it. Okay, good. So here we are. We actually are, if you saw, I had 3 rooms here, and one I called it DBAP equal power. And what I did for this one, I'm using just a quad speaker system. Okay, let me mute this music cue. I've got a little quad system, and let me just review. Everything is good here. Yes, it should be good. And let's put reset all, reset position, and we'll scale this. And let's look at the speaker alpha. So here we are. You're looking at the speaker alpha of this particular system. And if I close the reverb engine, what you basically see here is 4 speakers. It's on the DBAP algorithm. And we've got basically the equal power going on in distance base, where if my source is directly on that speakers, as you can see, there's actually no signals going anywhere else. And as I'm going to move this source, let's say I'm going to move it 45 degree towards the right, I'm going to have a distribution on the all speakers. All speakers are collaborating, right? But you'll have an equal total power. And that is the distance-based concept. Very practical. Want to kind of throw this on the equation. It's more on the panning conversation. I kind of want to throw this on the table as, one of the things to understand, okay? We have KNN as well. I think we're running out of time to talk about KNN, but KNN is another option, which basically what you need to understand is with KNN, you can define the number of speakers close to the source that are being used. 1 speaker, closer speaker, only output, and you can play a parameter called the nearest neighbor that allows you to actually do that distribution over more speakers. Simple. So that is our KNN option. Now, if we're talking about, a listener and those sweet spot centric, what we have to respect here is to, and what we call this being inside the convex all. What is important here is that these arrangements are critical to being compliant with any vector-based type panning, the VBAP, the VBIP, the layer-based amplitude panning, dual VBAP, anything that has to do with, with these panning methods that are angular style. And actually, I'm going to be loading a session in the back to actually show you this in action, which will make more sense. And let's go on panning rules and get ready for some intensity here. Et voila. Okay, so we have here multiple rooms because I want to start to talk about these various speakers arrangements and the collinear arrangements and coplanar system. And here we are in a collinear system. And what's a collinear system? It's a line of speakers. Actually, you can see it there. This is a collinear. It's a line on the Y. This is a collinear on the Z. Well, you have to do it like that to see that's a collinear on the Z. So these are two collinear systems. But last but not least, let's look at a more traditional collinear here, which would be a frontal systems, right? Think about these frontal system, immersive system that we've seen in the live production lately, 7, 8 angs of speakers around us. And let's look at this collinear system. And if we wanted to do the beautiful wave field synthesis, which we'll cover in 2 weeks, this would be the way. We've got a collinear system, and WFS, actually, as I'm talking about it briefly, is a system that we use collinear. Anything collinear on the X, on the Y, or on the Z can use WFS principles. I'm not going to go in depth into this because it's a later session. I just want to refer that collinear line of speakers really refers to a line of speakers. But if we're trying to do angular panning, you can see the challenges we'll be facing. Why? I guess I could maybe, yeah, you know what? Let me throw something back at you guys. And this is what I want to throw at you guys. Okay? It's what I want to throw at you guys. Think about triangles. Every time we get involved, I get involved with the speaker arrangements, I think triangles, right? I'll use a perfect simple example of this, right? You've got basically 4 speakers, a quad. You need to do another layer. Don't just make a speaker higher. Rotate the top arrangement so it forms some triangles. If you're following me, if you're rotating their top layer 90 degree, what's going to happen? You'll end up having a center, left, right, back versus front, left, right, and rear, left, right. Rotating, spinning, make some triangles. We do little demos like this all the time. It's very practical. So let's get back on the conversation here. But the thing is that if you're trying to use a VBAP panning, angular panning, what you want to be having is a triangle relationship from, the actual listener perspective and the speakers. And what we have for a challenge here, and this is why we're not accepting a VBAP panning on a collinear system, is that source here. There's no triangles. You can clearly see that there's no triangles. So I cannot properly process this spatially to give you a proper feeling of it. So that is a no-go. This won't be allowed. Now, how do we fix this? We've looked at in the slides, and I'll go back into it. How do we fix this? We fix this with a phantom speaker. Yeah, we can add the phantom speaker in the rear, for example, and that's a muted. That's a silent node, if you want to call it a silent node or a silent speaker. And this will allow me to, as I move away from here, well, then you'll have these 2 speakers that have, and you can see again that we have a triangle, right? This is just what it is. Basically, it boils down to triangles. As you move the source here, you're basically going to silent. And that's fine. There's no speakers, right? If you only have a front line of speakers. But these concepts are very important to understand as you start to deploy speaker arrangements. And I'm not going to spend all day on this because, it could get long, but it's what it boils down to. Phantom speakers, don't connect it anywhere. Then you can use a traditional collinear system or a front of line of speakers with an angular panning. Some people may be doing this actually, or some other tools may actually be doing this under the hood anyway, not showing it to you. But this is the trick to do it quite simply. Okay. So we looked at these collinear system and coplanar system. And then, so collinear. And now we've got the same things that are happening for coplanar system. That's another thing that we don't want to be kind of doing in VBAP panning. Sorry if I picked the right thing. And if we actually have a single plane, that is problematic. We don't want to be dealing with a single plane of, a single plane of speaker. And that's another actual single plane, single planes are not, and the same thing applies for what I could call a random one, or in a rake like this. These are single plane systems which would not apply and be compliant to the traditional VBAP panning. You want to be surrounding the listener, back to this. You can't form the triangles, quite simply. Hope this makes sense. Yeah. Why were I leaving this? Yeah. Okay. Let me put this. Okay. I'm going to start on the questions. We're running just on the hour. Perfect timing, actually. Let me just throw back the slides here. So what are we learning here? We're basically learning that, we've got the 2D distance base for equal power panning. When we have speakers around, important, this convex. So these are valid arrangements for 2D and 3D VBAPs arrangements, or all these angular style panning. When we have a collinear, like we just saw, and which is needed for wave fill synthesis, which we're just introducing, and we're talking about it in 2 weeks, these are not by default accepted for 2D, 3D vector-based panning. As I said, solution, add the phantom speaker, and you're done. And then you can use it. You just leave this as a dark speaker. Coplanar, same story. We don't have these triangles, so we'll be basically making KNN only available for a coplanar system, or a DBAP if you are in 2D. Yes, there's no current DBAP in 3D. No coincident speakers is simply to say that we won't be accepting two speakers at the same location, same azimuth and elevation, okay? Same azimuth and and elevation. Just plain simple. Don't want to have two speakers there. It just doesn't make sense from a panning. It's not going to work. Again, it become non-compliant. Okay. Hey, wow. I did it just over the hour. I think we started the time to really talk about the subject around 12:08, so whatever, on the hour sharp. And we'll turn in some Q&A questions, things that may have not been covered, or some questions. I see Nicola is typing here, so that's good. That is good. So I hope everyone actually enjoyed this stream. It's not finished. We'll get on the questions. But as we'll be looking forward to next week. As I said again, this stream will be available offline to watch again. Kind of talks about the question. No questions for now. I can't believe it. Maybe some are coming. Yeah, maybe. We'll give it a bit of time. We're not in a hurry. We're not in a hurry at all. But yeah. Maybe they're coming, maybe they're not coming. But I tried to cover a bit of the subject. Now it can get intense. But yeah, remember these triangles. If you're trying to listen, you got an audience zone. And it's not just one listener, by the way. We're talking about an audience zone, right? And if you say, well, these VBAP, panning approach don't work for a large audience, that's not true. They can work. You'll have the challenges of if someone is at the extreme, the source is actually, the source is at an extreme, and and you got people in the other extreme. Well, obviously, there's some challenges when you're not, inside that audience zone, which can be, quite wide. But it's still very usable. Don't get me wrong on this. Maestro DL style. This was awesome and mind blowing. Well, that's not a question, but I'll definitely take that comment. Appreciate it. We've been working very hard to make things as simple, make things as simple as possible, for users. We've got these little help, that tells you, hey, you may want to lower it because of that. We're going to try to keep building these little help because we give a lot of flexibility on speaker arrangements, right? Well, if no one are making comments, so Florian is saying merci for the information. He's looking forward to wave fill synthesis in SPAT. Well, beta testers appreciating it. I have a line of speakers of 7 little Meyer MM1 speakers right behind me. So yeah. This is it for me, I think. We can most probably just kind of wrap up on the fact that we've got these upcoming webinars. My friend Arsène and the team. Thank you for the moderators, Nicolas, Arsène, Jean-Loup, Gail's probably online, and maybe other people from the team. So yeah, they'll be posting the link for the next session, November 19th, next Thursday, same time. We'll be talking about object-based mixing and using snapshots to recall some scenes. We did not have that. Yay. And source transformation. You saw me transform a speaker arrangement. Think about taking some sources and transforming them, scaling, moving, and even add interpolation time in it. Okay, so that will be the subject on the 19th. Then we'll talk about spatial technology, and for our friend Florian, we'll be talking about wave fill synthesis on this particular one, along with other things such as new panning method called layer-based panning, amplitude panning. And last but not least will be the OSC refactoring, of, sorry for that, Sorry for that. So yeah, the OSC refactoring and the ADM OSC support a new initiative for standardization in the industry. So on this note, I think that we can say thank you everyone for connecting here. You know, join the FLUX Immersive Consulting group on Facebook. This is a user group. There's some conversation going on that one. Obviously, we've got the FLUX, standard page on Facebook. We've got this YouTube channel as well, which is a bunch of resources. We've been trying hard to put more resources than ever. So thank you everyone for joining in, for tuning in. Hugo Larin from FLUX Immersive, live here from the Montreal studio. Hope you had a great time, and let's actually roll.
In my head, tonight was perfect, but in yours, it was quite the opposite.
What are we doing and why is it special? Like on the surface, we're doing a new type of silent headphone show using immersive binaural mixing, which is just a nerdy way of saying you're in the middle of the band and the instruments are around you as opposed to shooting at you. It's like the most basic way to say it. And we've learned that like it really does add value and depth to the experience. So what's unique about it is our ability to put instruments around their head, and not just that in fixed positions, but we're also able to move instruments around their head live in real time. And what's kind of impressive on the tech end is that we're able to process this 3D movements around the subject in real time without latency. So all this to say, it's putting the audience in the center of the music and allowing the music to really engulf them is the idea.
In my head, my life's all night.
A typical headphone show would just be, you do a mix through microphones and the band and everything, and you mic everything up, and then instead of like your outputs going to speakers, then it would go to headphones, and you'd have like headphone distros or wireless or whatever. And now with this binaural thing with the encoder, you use the same pair of headphones you would normally use, but you can treat the audio so it sounds like it's coming from all around your head.
You know I've grown up, there are sins that I've got that I will one day.
Yeah, it'll be unconventional from even listening to music on your iPod. It's not gonna feel like that. It's not gonna feel like you're at a bar. It's not gonna feel like you're at a theater even. It's just such a new thing. But yeah, it's an immersive experience.
Both the philosophy of our new album and the philosophy of this project have kind of merged at the perfect time. As the tech is developing and the tech is trying to, again, solicit meaningful and immersive experience and doing a poor job of articulating whatever that is. But the whole album is this effort to describe something undescribable, which is a weird thing to say out loud, but that's basically it. It's us just wrestling with this idea of trying to define what makes something special.
It's gonna be different. It's kind of nice to have something where you're just listening to it, just you and the band. It's not, you can kind of connect more with the band, I feel. You can get a more sense of the music, because, I mean, live is always a great experience, but having it just you and the headphones, I feel like is gonna be a really unique experience.
So the way we have it set up is the console is processing all of the inputs, and then in the engine we have 2 MADI cards. So all of the inputs are processed, the direct outs are patched out to MADI. We have 2 MADI interfaces that are connected with 2 Mac Minis. And it's a fully redundant system, so they're both running in parallel. So if one fails, I can very easily, with one button, switch to my backup system, which is always following all my snapshots. Yeah, so a little shot of the snapshot page, super simple to use. Having all the plugin parameters on this encoder bank is integral. The integration of FLUX with SPAT is fantastic.
Yeah, like to be honest, going in, I was thinking things like small things when you're kind of like, oh, I wonder if the lights outside will be distracting because the lights are still on, or I wonder if like the headphones will become annoying after a while. But honestly, as soon as they started playing, it just kind of like all faded away, and they just transport you to a whole other place.